This week we got a train wreck of an interview by OpenAI CTO Mira Murati about Sora. We'll get to that in a minute. Also, the EU passed their AI Act, which I want to talk about. And it's actually been, as of this week, 1 year since we saw that first ever demo of GPT-4, where Greg Brockman famously, I think, sketched up a joke website, took a photo of that website, and then immediately the internet said all front-end developers are ruined forever.
Yeah, exactly.
But let's talk first about the train wreck Sora Wall Street Journal interview. And I want to play a clip of that and then we'll speak to it.
What data was used to train Sora?
We used publicly available data and licensed data.
So videos on YouTube?
I'm actually not sure about that.
Okay. Videos from Facebook, Instagram?
You know, if they were publicly available, publicly available to use, there might be the data, but I'm not sure. Yeah. I'm not confident about it.
What about Shutterstock? I know you guys have a deal with them.
I'm just not going to go into the details of the data that was used, but it was publicly available or licensed data.
So that was an interview with Wall Street Journal's Joanna Stern about Sora, and we saw some really impressive clips in the interview, but a lot of them, as Joanna Stern points out in the interview, had artifacts and obvious inaccuracies. Like in one of the clips, there's a person with 12 fingers in the video, and there's a lot of issues with tracking objects. There's one in New York City where a yellow taxi cab passes behind something, I forget what, and then turns into a Toyota Corolla that is now silver. So I think it's starting to show the reality with Sora that we are seeing a lot of the best of Sora, and that, you know, maybe this thing, you know, I question, I guess, how useful this thing's going to be. And then I guess the other major point out of this interview is the fact that, you know, she literally claims she doesn't know what made up the training data.
Yeah, and what was unclear to me, like, I think you were more, oh, okay, she's just playing dumb because, like, she doesn't want to reveal the fact that, yes, they definitely use copyrighted materials as much as they could get their hands on. But also, is she just completely misinformed? You think she would have at least practiced like a party line answer, like a politician, which she sort of did with, oh, if it was publicly available, but she sounded so confused and unsure. It just seems like, get some PR training, man. Like, figure out how to answer this question in an ambiguous way with confidence.
Yeah, all they needed to say was, look, we're not going to reveal the training data. We may do that in due course, but right now we're not ready to do that. Case closed.
It should be like, F you, we're billionaires. We do what we damn well please. We're making the best tech out there, and we don't really care. Sue us if you want.
What I found interesting, though, is, like, she said publicly available data, which kind of implies that they did train it on people's copyrighted data across likely...
Yeah, I mean, she's implying publicly available means if I can get to it with a web browser, then it's publicly available and it's mine. So
I've got, like, literally, I think one of the funniest memes on the internet ever, and I'm going to have to do my best to explain this to people listening, but this is a tweet I'll link to, and it says, all these cars in San Francisco were publicly available, and they've got a bunch of cars with their windows smashed in.
Oh man, I remember that window smashing thing. I used to live in San Francisco, as did you. And I remember walking my baby in a pram and just watching a guy go down the street and smash open every single window on the street and look for stuff in there. I reported it to the police who was there. He's like, nothing I can do, man. And yeah, and so people would get to the point where they'd leave the windows of their cars down to show, look, there's nothing inside. You can get in and have a look if you want, just so their windows wouldn't get smashed every day.
But I guess using your analogy is, for Google and for search indexing, people have left their websites exposed, their windows down, and now companies like OpenAI are coming through, crawling that data, training on that data, and then turning it into a product that could replace the same people that originally produced the content.
Yes, you're right. I did create an excellent analogy. But yeah, that's a good point. And I kind of agree. And I have been the entire duration of this podcast so confused about this issue because on one hand, I want the best available models out there and I want this technology to advance. But on the other hand, I can't help but put myself in a position where if I'd spent years and years either creating or curating knowledge in a format that's really, really good for learning, and then someone just came and took all that with their billions of dollars and then said, I won't even tell you if I've used your stuff. That would really upset me. And it doesn't seem right.
Yeah, I just think that there's going to be some huge copyright issues around this. We know that the New York Times is currently in a lawsuit with OpenAI around this exact issue. In fact, in the documents for this lawsuit, the second topic or point for the background is OpenAI and its business model are built on mass copyright infringement. So they are like, explicitly spelling this out. But it was also interesting hearing about the shortcomings of Sora itself. She talked about how expensive it is right now to run. Like basically it's just the cost of it seems like it's enormous. And if they released it, it would potentially send them broke or make them GPU poor, which I certainly think they don't want to be in that position. And so I think
also, as well as the cost, the quality isn't good. I mean, clearly they cherry-picked examples for this interview and it was riddled with artifacts. Like, if even your cherry-picked examples have problems of that nature, then what is the point of this technology?
Well, yeah, I agree. I think this is what I keep coming back to. And don't get me wrong, I'm incredibly impressed with what it's able to produce. I think in terms of like these diffusion models and how far we've seen them come, it's quite remarkable what it can do. Like when it works, it's phenomenal and you can truly get a glimpse of the future and what is potentially coming. But the reality check is this technology is super expensive right now. It's likely trained on a ton of copyright material that they could get sued for. It's not good enough yet that you can take these videos and go in and say, edit out that yellow taxi cab that turns into a silver vehicle. And so what's its real use other than like we say about all this technology? It's sort of like a hobbyist fun thing. Like people are probably willing to pay just for the fun of it to create the odd clip for a TikTok or YouTube video. But really outside of that, I don't really see it in the shorter term disrupting really much.
Most technologies we talk about on here, we can extrapolate them into the future and say, this is what it'll be used for. This is why it's amazing. And while the current tech might not be where we want it to be, we can see where it's going. Whereas this one, I can't really see. I mean, okay, other than like making a movie or illustrating points or whatever it is, faking deep fake videos, whatever it is. Other than that, there just doesn't seem to be like a mid-range use for this technology. And also, we just know from working with all like visual content creation AIs that it's very, very rare you can get them to follow your full prompt. People, even with something with using, say, Midjourney, which I think is better in almost every respect, even it requires advanced prompt crafting and other techniques in order to get exactly what you want. And even then you don't get exactly what you want. And the problem with something like generating videos like this, especially if you need character consistency and scene consistency, is that it's not going to be even close to that. And if you're essentially just generating random videos based on a prompt that look highly realistic, I can't see it being more than a gimmick for a long time to come.
Well, I think the closest comparison now is probably like Midjourney or DALL-E. I mean, certainly when building websites, looking for, instead of stock photography, I think DALL-E and Midjourney there are awesome for that, for like advertising use cases and website stuff. And perhaps here as stock video, there's a huge potential. It's probably the biggest short-term opportunity. I think longer term, you can imagine visual effects artists working with this technology and constantly tweaking the prompts in order to, get it to resemble what they're trying to create in a scene. I can totally see that happening, but I guess the real question is like, how far away are we from that before this is a reality? I don't think really we should downplay how cool or useful this technology might be, but I think there's a lot of things that need to be figured out first around the copyright issues and also, like you said, the prompting, the consistency, and then being able to pinpoint detail in the video in order to edit it correctly.
Yeah, and I also think they've really just straight up released this as a distraction from Google Gemini and other announcements from other companies, and the fact that they sort of haven't really done anything for a while. They just needed something out there to keep their name in the news and all that sort of stuff, and to show that after all the internal turmoil they had, that they're still doing stuff. So I think it's a straight gimmick. It's out there to distract people and just have something to talk about. I don't think they're too serious about it. I think they've probably got a bunch of AI scientists or whatever you want to call them experimenting with stuff. They're like, look at what I can do. That's kind of cool. Let's give it a name and get it out there.
It's interesting you say that, because I think one of my observations recently, looking at the releases we've had from Anthropic, and of course Haiku was released this week. I think they kind of did that to keep themselves in the news cycle as well. We'll get to it in a minute. But what I think is really interesting about Anthropic as a business right now is they're talking about how you can use this technology today, how you can take these 3 new models and what the best use cases are for them. And they're really the adults in the room right now, whereas OpenAI is just drama AI and then this Sora interview train wreck. Like the narrative from them now is more about the drama, and I don't know, is an enterprise looking at the technology, you can sort of look at it and say, okay, Anthropic's got these great models, clear use cases, they're very performant, they seem like a pretty reliable company to deal with, and they've got the infrastructure and backing of Amazon Bedrock now, where it's just available immediately. You can start to make the case, like the grown-ups in the room are starting to look like Anthropic, maybe.
Yeah, and I think that OpenAI has just internally made themselves seem untrustworthy. Like there's the whole Elon Musk going after them for basically being the opposite of what they set out to be. And they're publicly publishing private emails. This lady herself, like, I've never seen her interview before and I don't know her background, so I'll qualify it by saying that. But as just someone watching that interview for the first time, she just seems cagey and untrustworthy. Like, why do an interview like that? I don't really understand what they hope to gain from that if they're not willing to, if you're not willing to share anything about how you did something, why go out there and promote it? I just feel like them as a company, like I wouldn't trust building on them because anything could happen. Whereas, like you say, Anthropic's been just gradually beating that drum, bringing out better and better stuff, larger context windows, things that are actually useful to AI application development.
Yeah, I just think they need to, as a company, put their head down and focus on what they were best at, a year ago, which is these like great consistent releases, focusing on developers and just really, getting the house in order and stop the drama. Because if you're looking at this, you're thinking, well, why would you trust this company? I'm going to go to Anthropic. It's more reliable as a brand at this point. They've changed CEOs, like all of this ridiculousness is going on.
And also they keep releasing half-baked things. Like, if you look at the GPT's store, like, we kind of predicted by looking at the early bits of that it wasn't fully thought through. We know this because we made Sim Theory and it has a lot of the same concepts, and we know how many iterations and how much work and how many concepts need to be discovered and articulated for that to work. And even there, I'm not saying we've got it right by any stretch, but clearly they hadn't put in the effort required to successfully launch a product like that on a mass scale. And now with Sora, like, you really don't want to have all these things in your loss column that are just sort of half-assed, half-baked. What set them apart was just having the best model. And I feel like if they could do that again, then all this will be forgiven. But they need to be careful about souring their reputation with everyone if they can't back it up with something that just changes everything.
Yeah, I mean, this is the ultimate question, right? Is GPT-5 around the corner next week? And next week we're like, mind blown, like, this thing's amazing, it can do everything, the world's changed again. Or do we see, maybe an incremental upgrade and they've sort of hit some sort of wall? I know there's definitely this theme this week and the past couple of weeks of this like trough of disillusionment in AI starting to form, where a lot of people are saying this is a bubble, like these technologies are starting to hit an upper limit and an upper wall, at least for the time being. And, are they really justified in delivering on the promises? And there was an article in The Information this week, and I'll have to add it to the show notes because I don't even think I've got it in right now, but it talked about how a lot of the people from Google and Amazon are starting to downplay AI and its capabilities to enterprises as they're selling it. They're starting to lower the expectations a lot of what it can actually do in a practical sense in the enterprise today. And so I think what we're seeing is some tempering of expectations, but also you sort of see all of these technologies being released, and we've been criticized about it so many times in comments when I come out and say we're still in a hobbyist phase. And that's because I kind of believe it. Like, yes, there's a lot of practical uses of AI today. We're certainly taking advantage of many of those, but I think it's also when you see demos like Sora, you're sort of like, this is kind of just fun right now.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's the thing. And we definitely oscillate between talking about what's here and now and that we can try. And I think that's always a good grounding exercise, is to actually go try it, and why we get so frustrated when people announce things like Sora and you can't actually try it. And that brings you into the current moment. Like, what can we do now? And there's a lot of great stuff you can do right now. But I also like, and I know you also like, to extrapolate and go, if this technology goes all the way, what can it do? And I think that's where people get excited. And it's the sort of area under the curve between those two things that lead to the disillusionment and the, oh well, this is kind of actually kind of shit. Like, I think that there's cases to be made on both sides, and you really can be happy with what we have now and excited about the future. But I think people just wanting to dismiss the current AI technology outright because it doesn't quite meet those expectations is not the right perspective to have. You can't dismiss it completely. It's coming. It's just that right now, not everything lives up to what we see in the cherry-picked examples.
So let's take a quick look. The EU passed the AI Act this week, and you know, I won't get into huge detail on this outside of saying what I found interesting was this tweet from Christopher Manning, where he linked to a clause in this act that says, in order to increase transparency on the data that is used in the pre-training and training of general purpose AI models, including text and data protected by copyright law, it is adequate that providers of such models draw up and make publicly available a sufficiently detailed summary of the content used for training the general purpose model. So this may actually lead to OpenAI, this act, having to reveal the training data that goes into their models. What I find counterintuitive here, though, is that the actual clause says that it doesn't reveal, like, you don't have to go to the extent of revealing trade secrets, but it's starting to feel to me like the training data used in these models is the trade secret, in the sense that the difference between, you know, a good model and a bad model does seem to be the extent and the quality of the training data.
Absolutely. I mean, in a lot of cases, it literally is the difference, because they're using the same algorithm to train it. So that is what set them apart, is that they did it at a scale not yet seen before with the latest algorithm. So I'm sure there is proprietary stuff they have and will continue to do. There's definitely parts of GPT-4 that nobody knows how it works. But to say, yeah, the argument that, well, this is my trade. It's similar in the food industry. Like, a lot of processed foods get away with not listing all of their ingredients by saying it's trade secrets. And so they're like, yeah, we did this, but because it was done in the manufacture of the product, we don't have to list it as an ingredient on the list because it's not in the final output of the food. And that's how they get away with completely messing with the way foods are produced, such as using like GMO enzymes, but then it doesn't have to appear on the label because it's not in the final product. And it's similar here. I can use all the copyrighted crap I want and go, oh, well, no, that's not actually contained in the final model, but I used it to make it. And I feel like if the food industry can get away with it, then these guys definitely can.
So another one of the other areas the AI Act covers, which I actually think this is probably like a net positive thing for consumers, is rights around the impacts of the use of these AI models for banks and insurers and governments. So one of those being obviously like, you know, credit approvals and things like that, like understanding how they're using AI, you know, in the real world, and like if it can potentially target specific groups of people and things like that. So I think that's actually a pretty good thing. But overall, just reading through this from my perspective as a developer and someone with a sort of startup mindset, it did concern me that legislation this early is basically like a huge win for big tech who can afford to, get all the certifications and documentation and sort of get the house in order to be able to deploy these models into Europe and the enterprise there and all of those different factors where startups seem to get royally screwed over, where they just are not going to have the resources without raising huge sums of capital. So it's very hard to launch a disruptive startup in Europe as a result of this in AI because of, you're reading through all this legislation trying to figure it all out when we haven't even truly figured out AI yet and what's a successful business model from it.
Well, that's assuming that the startups obey it, though. It's similar to the GDPR, where when that came out, the compliance burden for smaller startups was so high. Like, I remember doing it for our own business, and it took me months to get everything that we needed to do to become GDPR compliant done. And the reality was, and we even knew it at the time, they're only going to prosecute the big boys, right? Like, because they want that big Facebook, Meta charged $30 million for GDPR violations. They want the headlines. They want to be out there saying, we are doing stuff to protect our EU consumers. And I feel like it's the same here. As much as you're right, it's the big guys who will be most be able to comply with it because they can afford to. They're also most likely to be the ones who'll actually be prosecuted for any violations, whereas some excuse me, ankle biting startup probably can get away with it long enough to where they can actually afford to do it.
Yeah, I think though overall it's just conducive to this whole idea that companies will yet again stop releasing technology in Europe because of the regulation burden. They'll just be like, we're releasing it in the US and the UK and Canada, Australia, wherever it doesn't have the laws, and in Europe, we're not going to release it or it's going to come later. And I mean, they're already experiencing that in the EU right now. So I think it'll probably just get worse.
Well, yeah. And also, the Chinese don't give a shit about any of this stuff. And we look at models like Quen, which I was looking into vision models today because of this deep, whatever it's called.
DeepSeek.
DeepSeek VL. I was looking at that, and in their own benchmarks, I must admit, and I don't know if we talked about it, but I didn't realize that Quen had multiple vision models available, and I haven't tried them. So I really need to get into that. But they have Quen VL Plus and Quen VL Max, and it wins on all of the benchmarks over Gemini Pro and GPT-4 Vision by quite a significant margin. So A, I'm keen to try those out, but B, I don't think we're going to see the Chinese slowing down or tempering themselves in terms of what they use for training data. And right now, they're releasing their models to everyone. So I feel like, yeah, okay, put all the laws you want in, but it's not going to stop some companies around the world from continuing to use everything they can get their hands on.
They should call it the Progress Reduction Act.
Yeah, exactly. So, but then again, it comes back to what I said earlier, which is I also sort of understand why people want to know what's in there and also want to prevent certain things from being in there. So, yeah, it's a really tricky thing to legislate, I think, and definitely a tricky thing to enforce.
I'm not
I mean,
surprised
it's
that
going to be hard to prove as well that specific things were used.
I'm not surprised they're the best at vision though. Don't they have cameras like even on their beaches? Like they're literally cameras everywhere. Like
Yeah, well,
course.
that's true. I mean, if they're training it on surveillance information, but it's a valid point. I mean, they're going to have really good vision models if they have the best training data. So, yeah, I don't know. I don't know where I stand with the legislation thing. I think it's probably good that they're trying to do it. It's just that how are you going to enforce it? Especially because, like, let's face it, OpenAI doesn't care about the legislation. You sure saw how evasive that lady, the CTO of OpenAI, was with the question. She's clearly like, we're just not going to tell you. Like, come after us. Like, I think, and they're just going to have armies of lawyers who just delay it in the courts for as long as it takes.
So it's officially been 1 year since the famous, or now famous GPT-4 demo, which honestly, like, I'll admit that I was truly blown away by, in the sense of Greg Brockman, sketching up a joke website on a whiteboard and then taking a photo of that and asking the GPT-4 model to create the website. And he was able to demonstrate that live to everyone on this live stream. And subsequently, a handful of people got access to GPT-4 and were posting examples similar to kind of what we've seen from Sora and what it could do. Then it was released through the API, fairly limited access, and then it came, of course, through ChatGPT Pro with very harsh rate limits, if you recall, and it was very slow at the start. Now, a lot of people have said that since it's been absolutely neutered and crippled, I am definitely one of them. I think it's gotten way worse, and lately probably the worst it's ever been, which has forced me to start, like, I'm actually using Claude now primarily because of how crippled and slow it's become. But I thought it was interesting to reflect on 1 year since. And I remember when we first saw this demo, as I mentioned earlier, everyone on Twitter, and I can say Twitter because it was still called Twitter back then, was saying, oh, all front-end developers are dead. Like, devs are going to lose their job. Like, I should pick up a trade now because I'll still have years of usefulness left. But subsequently, over a year has passed, I don't think we've seen anything close to that. And I know a lot of the early work with GPT-4 and the excitement of it was even people like us. Like, I remember trying to create a Python app that would just keep programming itself and make itself better and better and better. We also saw the release of AutoGPT subsequently after that, where people were trying to get it to, complete tasks and basically have some form of agency. And a lot of those things ended up being really expensive demonstrations, probably an early look at the future, but didn't accomplish much. And then most of the industry since went and focused on RAG, improving RAG, which is retrieving data from large data corpuses, and also basically function calling, where you give the AI access to skills. And so we've, as a market, we've been off going and solving those problems. And I think one thing we said continuously on the show, at least in our first year of doing this, was that developers need time to go and figure out this technology and really how to use it. And this week, we saw Cognition announce Devin, which is essentially trying to replace a junior dev on your team. So I thought it would be a chance to talk about our impressions so far of Devin, but also reflect on 1 year since GPT-4.
Yeah, well, I mean, you can't give impressions for something you can't try, right? Like, I have applied for access, but the problem with a lot of these things is they make all the claims, but then when you actually want to use it, you can't. And so it's a little bit frustrating in that sense that people are able to go make these big promises, but then they go, oh, actually, it's only for like this elite group who are guaranteed to say positive things about it. I made comments to you about the general idea of replacing developers with AI, both now and into the future. And one thing that we had done as a company in the very early days of our company was we started hiring people out of these dev schools, like, I forget their name, like Dev Boot Camp and what's the other one called? But there was a whole bunch of them at the time because everyone was having trouble hiring software engineers. And so people are like, let's just basically make factories where you can train these people in 12 weeks, and they take them through front-end web development, back-end web development with either Ruby or Python or whatever it was, or Node.js, and front-end using React or whatever the frameworks were at the time. And then you've got a freshly minted junior dev who you can then bring into your team and get them to do tasks. And we hired a whole bunch of them. And it seemed like a really, really smart idea initially because they cost so little compared to the senior and mid-level developers, and you could rapidly expand the software in your project. The problem in the long run with them was that aside from the few who continued their own private education and just became proper developers, the ones who stayed junior required so much micromanagement that you had to not only define the task, you had to show them where in the code to do it, approximately how to do it. You essentially had to have a full-time senior engineer coaching them through the tasks. And at one point,
prompting them.
Pardon? Prompting them. Yeah, that's a good point. And to the point where I actually confronted one of our senior engineers at one point who was essentially just doing all of the work for one of the juniors because they just weren't capable of doing the work. And then as we looked deeper and deeper into it, we realized that 70 to 80% of our senior developers' time, and let's be honest, it was probably 100% of the time they were at work and they were making up the extra work outside of hours, um, was spent coaching them and helping them and describing where to find this in the code. And we'd have these junior developers like literally add like on the task notes, like, oh, I can't really figure out where in the code this is. I can't figure out this. And I just feel like this is what we're going to see with tools like this Devin thing. Yes, in certain examples, it will be capable of taking in the whole code base and working out where to make changes. It's probably going to be better at that in the sense of than a junior dev. But can it take simple requirements and turn them into code that actually does what is intended without extremely detailed explanations of what you want? And what I've seen with large language models regarding helping you with code is they only do really well if the context is completely unambiguous, and even then only on small amounts of code. As soon as it comes to writing whole modules, they either take shortcuts by just saying, oh, and fill in the rest here, or they just completely lose it in terms of what the overall task is. And so my point is that while a tool like this might technically be capable of doing the job, it's going to require so much working with it and explaining to it, like in terms of locating where, how to verify if it works, what exactly needs to be done, that it's going to lead to this same micromanagement that we saw with real life devs, where you, as the senior person or the one instructing this employee, is going to spend all your time working with it when you could actually be just making the changes yourself. And that's what I anticipate, at least for the first year, is going to happen with tools like this. People are going to realize it's just not profitable to use it in terms of time, and it will be easier with real devs.
So I think we should back up a little bit. So Cognition's a company that's raised 21 million in Series A funding very recently. I think total fundraising's a little bit more than that. The company's called Cognition. The product is called Devin, not to be confused with the Devin meat.
Which is an Australian thing. I'm not sure if other people would.
No,
know
I think it's like spam or yeah. Anyway,
it's like bologna.
Yeah. So they called it Devin. I think it's meant to be like dev in, like doing
it's
Devin.
Clever. Well done. Good naming.
Yeah, so they claim it's the first AI software engineer, and essentially what it is like ChatGPT. You give it a prompt, but it has a web browser. It has a console. It can run and execute code, similar to, I guess, to Open Interpreter in a lot of ways. I think it's a beautiful UI is the first thing I'd say. The concern I have is similar to what you were saying about, micromanaging junior devs. What it seems to be good at right now, and I'm not saying it won't improve over time, is giving it very broad tasks. So like, hey, go to this GitHub repo where there's some code and go and install it for me and get it running. So get this open source project running, or get a model fine tuning or whatever it is, like a broad stroke task. I think what it probably struggles with, and again, not being able to use it right now, is when you want to get into the detail of things. And I think this is similar to the Sora problem, where, you want to give it very explicit instructions and prompts to get it to change certain things in the project without rewriting or modifying things. And I think this is something that when we see like a GPT-5 or whatever's next, they really need to be able to figure out that reasoning and problem solving in a lot more detail. Otherwise, like you said, like, I guess for this product to be successful, for this company to survive long enough for this to become a reality and actually threaten a software engineer on your team, they're going to have to make money. So it's going to have to be better as an assistant to you than using, say, ChatGPT to code. And I would question the end user initially for this is existing software engineers. And they're going to feel much more confident having full control over the code. Therefore, they're going to still probably go back to a Claude or a ChatGPT to prompt it in the near term and won't pay for this.
I also like I've never worked in an organization that works with like say strict waterfall development where everything's specified and you use UML and all that bullshit you learn at university, right? I'm sure there's some places out there that do that. My reality over my, I don't know how many years I've been a programmer since I was 16, um, is that really programming is a discovery process. It's an iterative process where you try something, test it, you're like, oh, that makes me realize we need to do this, or that has now given me the idea that we need to add this, or oh, that won't work because of X. There's always my whole day when I'm working on software is that it's this constant, oh shit, I didn't think of that. Oh, I need to figure this out. Like, that is what programming is to me. It's not just writing the code, like, like, if I could just sit there and just write the code for a thing and just producing code was my problem, I'd like, it wouldn't really be a job, would it? It would just be like, I don't know, like some mindless task like data entry that you need to do. But it's not that. It's an art form. It's a creative process, and that requires feedback, and that requires you storing, I guess, the context, let's put it, in your own brain and working out what needs to happen, like you say, with the problem solving. And I feel like my experience working with LLMs on code so far is I have to do that bit. I have to discover what the next problem is and then ask it for the solution to that problem to speed me up. So, for example, in a program, let's say I know, okay, I need to query this in the database. Like I need to find out like all the records in the database that have this properties. I can then go ask the LLM, can you give me a query to do that? Right? That speeds it up because I don't have to remember the exact SQL syntax in order to be able to do that. But I knew what needed to be done in that case. And so I really feel like the thing I've seen the LLM struggle with on so far is that bit, knowing what the next thing that needs to be done is. And if I'm sitting there all day telling it what the next thing that needs to be done is, then really, like, does it actually help me when I could already ask it what the syntax for the next thing to be done is, for example?
But this is my point around a lot of these AI projects right now, and why I think we're sort of entering this period of like trough of disillusionment in the innovation curve, is that it falls short on that reasoning, thinking chain of thought. That agency, I think, is what you're describing. The agency to say, no, I got to go do this now to get it going. And it falls
sort of like in Star Trek, where they like ignore the captain's orders and do something else because they know it's the right thing to do. You know?
And I think that the problem is these models like Sora, like we talked about earlier, and then this application Devin that's just really using GPT-4 is just falls short enough that it's actually, outside of a really cool tech demo and exciting, not enough to have subscribers outside of people playing around with it for a while, trying to find use cases, and then when the hype cycle of that particular product is gone, drops it. I mean, they just don't use it anymore. Maybe they've just really got to find that breakthrough moment where people will pay and stay subscribed and keep paying them because they're getting value out of it. And I haven't used it yet, so it's really hard to infer this, but that's the feeling I get right now, is that we will get access eventually, play around with it, and be like, you know what, this thing, it's just not
and
good enough.
I just think about that. Like we've got software to be built. I just think if I had access now, what would I ask it to do, and how much induction would it need to get to the point where it could actually do those things? I've got to give it access to everything. I need to give it a way to test its changes. I need a way for it to like run the code and get it hosted, and like not all.
But I think that isn't that what the project does. I mean, that's like essentially what it can do. It's got its own console, its own local host. Like it can get things running, and
Yeah, I know, but I mean, like, you've still got to set up an environment for it, get it all the environment. I don't know.
But can it set up its own environment? I mean, maybe. We'd need to see.
I sincerely doubt it. If it can, that's pretty
if
impressive.
It can, maybe AGI has been achieved.
Maybe a simple Python project, sure, you could get it going. But in my experience, again, projects there's more entropy over time. Like a project like ours at Auto, for example, it take I mean, even actually our modern iteration's fairly easy to set up, I must admit. The guys have done a great job, but there's still stuff you've got to do to get it running. And I realize it's only an initial investment, and if this thing's a full-on employee, then it's worth it, just like it is with a real one. I I just there's so many things that it's got to get right for it to be useful. I just really doubt it's going to be something that just takes just dev jobs start dropping like flies
My
anytime
big
soon.
question here is, can this company survive long enough for the technology to get good enough that you actually have a product that is so great and can spawn up a team of developers to achieve a goal and have some sort of agency that you would use it? But at that point, I would sort of say, well, we're probably at AGI, and like I've got a robot washing my dishes, so like the whole economy would change.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. And I think again, it's a case where this will happen. Like there's no doubt at some point it'll be good enough to do it. But I think a lot of it is going to be, like you say, a company specializing in this one task of what ultimately becomes an AGI, and giving it the the strategies and skills it needs to do this specific kind of task. And I think that's definitely the case now, where a lot of the startups that I subscribe to in terms of AI, even though I have the ability to access the models myself, are just where they've taken the time to customize it and set it up so it's really, really conducive to doing those kind of tasks. And I don't have to use my time to do that. It's really a convenience thing all right now. And for some people would be a skill thing. Like if you don't have the ability to do it and they do, then great, I'll pay for that.
We talked about, though, ever since GPT-4 came out, and I mentioned it earlier, this idea that developers need to go off now and you know, all the pieces are kind of sitting there to do great things with this technology. And I think, to the credit of Cognition with Devin, they've gone out, they've said, okay, all the pieces exist to actually create something like this. We're going to build a phenomenal UI. I think it looks great. I haven't used it, but I've seen demos and I think it looks really good. And we're going to stitch all this stuff together, and we're just going to focus on a singular problem with these technologies to make it outperform the, you know, the sort of default LLMs where you're just prompting it for code and then having to go do that work yourself. So I think this...
Yeah, like as much as I'm being critical, it's the kind of thing, like if I could invest in that, I would, because I feel like if they have, like you say, if they've got a long enough runway where they can stick with this one problem until the tech catches up and they can get their sales and marketing happening, there will be enough companies out there that benefit from this, and they will get it to a point where it works. I have no doubt in their long-term success, actually. I just wouldn't use it myself.
Yeah, I mean, I think if it can be trained on an existing an app and understand the code base, and anyone on the team, like a potential product manager or someone from a customer success team, can be like, hey, can you change this button to do this and spin up a local version that I can pitch to my team, then you know, that starts to become something I think people would clearly pay for and see a ton of value in. So I agree with you. I think it is a thing. It will be a thing. The question is can these early first movers survive long enough, or have something people are willing to pay for in order to survive? And this is the biggest question I have for a lot of these startups launching, is will they actually survive, and how much in a period of potential negativity and disillusionment are these VCs going to stand behind these companies, like, and keep funding them without necessarily an upside inside? And so, you know, it's kind of why a lot of people imply it's a bubble right now, because a lot of these companies have huge valuations, and you think, well, how are they going to, in the shorter term, live up to those valuations, and will the VCs keep propping them up?
Yeah. I mean, who cares, right? Like, that's their problem. I don't know. Yeah.
So just thinking this through, like if you were to go and build something like a Devin now, and I mean, we've got a fair amount of experience through Sim Theory now of the RAG side, the memory side, and some of the components of potentially doing this. As you said earlier, the biggest limitations are around like the sort of chain of thought reasoning capability seem to still be the biggest issues, in that sense of agency. Do you think, given what you're seeing in technologies, this is something OpenAI could just like drop a huge improvement around this?
I just think there's so much specialty that's needed for something like this, because you can't just add code to a project and commit it. Like you've got to test it. And I just think about my own development, like um in terms of, okay, oh, a process is stuck and not working. I realize, oh, I need to restart that. Or, oh shit, I'm editing the wrong file. Like in the case where you're compiling static assets or something like that. Like you might see code in a static file, edit that instead of the source code that's running. Like we use tailwinds in some of our projects, and if that thing isn't running, you make a change, that change doesn't show up, you're like, what the hell's going on? You've got to be like, oh, I'm not running the tailwinds process. Like there's so many environmental things around that process of change some code, get it to run, test it wherever you're testing it, like compile it in the case of an iPhone app, or if it's a web browser, refresh the page. Maybe it auto refreshes, maybe it doesn't. Navigate to the correct section of the app to test it. Make sure you've got test data to actually log into an account, log out. So it's going to have all those browser navigation or app navigation capabilities. Like the actual test part of making the changes, to me, is the thing that they're going to struggle to solve the most, because there's so many things. Like this is most of software development, is that part where you've got to actually try the stuff you make. Also, genuinely our biggest criticism over time with developers is like, did you even try this once? Because if you did try it once, then you'd realize it doesn't work, right? But at the same time, devs have their own local setup where they are trying things. They're just maybe not trying it with as many different data sets as they should be. But my point is that if they can make a system to, like, they can make a system to write code, we've seen that. But to then insert that code and test it in context, I think is a much, much bigger problem. And like if they've solved that, I'd be blown away at how they've done it in a generic way on any environment. Like that's the other thing. People work on Windows or Macs or in VMs, or a lot of people use Docker for development where they're running 5 different Docker images that need to be like recompiled and tested. And I don't know, there's just so many things that go, and so much diversity in the way projects are developed. I just don't see how you make a generic solution for that.
Yeah, I just can't personally see a world in the next decade where software engineers or developers or, are really necessarily replaced. I think they'll be augmented by these technologies and tools. I think they already are. In the last 12 months, we've seen huge augmentation. I mean, we know as GPT-4 has subsequently got lazier and slower, you can just see on X a stream of complaints every time this happens, because people have become reliant on these models to help them perform better. I read a study recently that said, especially when programming at night, which I do every night, you start to lose some cognitive capacity because you're tired. And that's where LLMs are really supportive, like debugging things when you're tired.
Yeah, and the other thing I find with Copilot is that, like I said earlier, one of the big issues with development is knowing what to do next. Like, okay, I've got that working, what's next? And what I find really helpful with something like Copilot is I just start typing code comments of what needs to be done next, and then it'll suggest code for that. And I find that that's really good at keeping you in the flow of development, where you're not stuck on, all you need to figure out is what needs to be done next. And then it sort of kickstarts you. And even if the code's wrong, it doesn't matter, because it's sort of, when I see wrong code, I know what needs to be done to make it right. And so I feel like in terms of workflow, the current technologies are excellent for that. And definitely there'll be a next level to that. But I just don't see it jumping to the point where I'm like, I just write a prompt and it writes the program. Like it's just not going to happen.
I mean, you
I've
kind of
tried
are
like
doing
6 of
that.
those.
You kind of are doing that now. Like you're writing you're doing this sort of agency or chain of thought planning for it by writing the comments and having your sort of RAM or context window of the whole project in some form or another. So, and you know your goals as well. So you're sort of going through and writing comments of what needs to be done. And as you said, and I find this too, often it will write absolute garbage code or get variable names wrong, but it's enough as a scaffold to at least start you off in the right direction and keep you productive.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of people out there are worried. They're thinking, well, is my job as a software developer going to go away? And my message, and I'm not saying I can predict the future, is I don't think so. In fact, I think it will be the best language, knowing how to code, to be able to communicate with these assistants by communicating alongside them in a project and working together and just, as I said earlier, like augmenting productivity. I really think that's where it will go over the next decade, where people just are essentially superhuman, and you'll look back and be like, I can't believe we didn't have this level of abstraction before, and you just won't remember what life was like before it.
Yeah, it's funny. People who use the language Lisp, like Paul Graham, for example, the founder of Y Combinator, he wrote a book on Lisp, and his big thing about why he thought Lisp made him successful is that it's meta programming. So it has a way where you can write code that writes code, essentially. And so you do this meta code that's generating the code it needs as it goes when you write the program. And Lisp is really was until the current iteration was the foundational language of all AI related or machine learning related projects prior to um, Python really taking over as the academic language. And I feel like that's sort of what you're saying, like having the AIs write code that then can get you to the next step, and you understanding what's going on seems like where the biggest productivity gains are, because you're speaking a language that's common to you both, and that has practical applications and can actually be executed.
You've also got to have like the entrepreneurial ideas or the capability to like understand a problem, understand what users might want, and then at least be prompting back and forth with an AI to achieve an outcome that then is of some value to either your business or to people willing to pay for a product. And so even if the abstraction level gets that high, I still think there's just so many roles in developing the future of technology. Like I just don't see a day where they're like, all right, that's it, all software engineers are fired.
Yeah.
The CEO just sits there with, like a stream deck with a bunch of buttons in front of the computer, just punching buttons, like,
Well, and then you
running
could
the
argue
business.
at that point, what's the point of developing software anyway? Like if the AI can operate the computer fully and do anything you want, wouldn't you just code every single program you need on the fly? Like why even have pre-made programs at that point? Just get it to do whatever the thing is you want done.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. Maybe in a year, I'll be apologizing for questioning our robot overlords.
Like so for example, like yeah, like what's the point of Photoshop if you can make any image you want or any image modifications you want directly with the model? There's no point. Like, what's the point of, I don't know. There's a whole bunch of pieces of software that will just become completely irrelevant in themselves because the AI will be able to do it directly.
Yeah, I mean, at that point, at that like AGI, however you define it, I think it does just completely, if society goes down that path, it just removes the need for it completely because it's just completely unnecessary. But humans are unnecessary at that point. So, like,
Yep.
All right, moving on before we go down that rabbit hole. Anthropic, to stay in the news and also, get the attention I think it rightfully deserves, announced that they have released Claude 3 Haiku. So we mentioned on the show last week all about Claude 3 Haiku, and we went into detail on the other models, Opus, and now I'm forgetting the name of the mid-tier one.
Opus and you're testing me.
Yeah,
as
good
well.
names. We'll call it Claude Medium.
I like it. I'll tell you in a sec.
Yeah, so they announced that it's their fastest model. Now,
Sonnet.
I've got to say, I'm super duper excited about this model. So it's 25 cents per million tokens as opposed to GPT 3.5 at 50%. 50 cents. So it's half the price of GPT 3.5 is the best way to think about it. It's on benchmarks, performs far superior, I believe, on almost every benchmark outside of mixed evaluations, one particular benchmark. So it's far better than GPT 3.5. It's also vision enabled, and it has the 200K context window, which is truly mental.
That's the bit that's absolutely crazy, to have a model with that price, with that large context window. Because one of the biggest problems with the large context window on the bigger models is it's just so expensive. You like anything significant I want to do on this on a large scale is just not practical because the cost just blows out as soon as you get to prod.
It does say prompts containing over 32K tokens will experience much slower ingestion speeds, just as like a full disclaimer there. So
That's the same on all of them, though. Like that, I don't think that's unique to this model.
yeah, and they give some really great examples. Again, like this is what I love about Anthropic. They're giving actual real world examples and building them to demonstrate what's possible. And look, Claude Haiku, when I announced it last week on the show, I sort of downplayed the like its ability, I think. Like, oh, this is just some small, cheap model that can run, very basic things. And we mentioned the future of programming might be like lazy function calling, where you just in your code ask something like Claude 3 Haiku to return a value or return some data and do some work for you, where you don't want to build some very complex function in order to do that.
Yeah, and I do that constantly in software now. I literally have a method that just like ask AI question, and I just throw anything at it, and it answers brilliantly. I'm
Yeah,
gonna switch to
and
this. For
so
that.
like this is what I mean. It's super fast, super cheap to run. It's cognitively, if that is an ample way to describe this, superior to GPT 3.5. And one of the demo videos, I'm not going to play the audio from this, but I'll explain it to those listening, is those annoying forms when you go to the doctor and you've got to answer all those questions, tell them your symptoms, and then the doctor doesn't even read it because they couldn't be bothered reading the form and just ask you all that stuff again. Well, they have this example on the website of a chat bot that is using Haiku and just asking a series of health questions here in the demo and formulating like a list of symptoms and a summary for the doctor. And at the end of all of these questions, it produces this nice summary that the doctor can quickly read before going into an appointment. And it even incorporates vision into the demo by getting them to upload a photo of any medication they're currently taking. So in this case, they take a photo of some tablets that they're taking. It's able to identify those tablets and the dosage, confirm that it's correct with the patient, and then they say yes, and it goes on. And this is what I love about how they're presenting these models, is they're actually demonstrating that these can be used for real world scenarios and are really beneficial. What blows me away about the vision model, just from pretty limited testing, but using my Tesla Model 3 scenario test, which if you're familiar on the show, we use all the time. Honestly, it performs just as good as Opus, except way faster. And I don't really understand why, outside of saying it just must be the same vision model being used.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. Like about a vision model, because we've seen this other one come out today that's a 7 billion model and it performs excellently. So maybe vision models are just more conducive to being smaller, like they still are able to perform at a higher level despite being smaller. One thing, so Claude Haiku is now available in Sim Theory as of this morning. And something that's very interesting about it, we often add new smaller models to Sim Theory just so it's an easy way to try, and it's a different way to try it than interacting with the model directly, because Sim Theory obviously has layers of things in the prompts that are far more detailed than a raw prompt. So for example, we have memory in there, we have context information about the user, we have its ability to call functions anytime it wants, and a few other things in the prompt, like holding the personality and some rules around like not going outside the constraints of the mission of the agent, for example. Now, those things are what can make the experience on Sim Theory with either a procedural step or chatbot feel magical and feel like it really is this specific agent. However, when it comes to smaller models, they struggle with all those different kinds of prompt because there's a lot to take in, the relative attention on the different parts. It doesn't know how to prioritize. So generally speaking, for the smaller models, when it comes to the function routing, like deciding what to do, like, so say you write to the chatbot, hey, make me an image of former Australian Prime Minister Julia Gillard, it needs to decide to call the make image function. Now, when I use smaller models for that decision-making process, it often has trouble and doesn't work. And so what I do is I fall back to the larger models to make the decision of what to do, then go to the smaller model to actually like write the image prompt.
And I
or
think
answer the
one
question.
thing that's important to point out is previously you really needed a model of GPT-4 capability to do that, right? Like this is not
Yes.
something that 3.5 would work on.
Even Claude 2.0 struggled with it. And I generally just used GPT-4 because it was the one that gave the most consistently reliable output. But as the models have gotten better, I've increasingly handed the reins over to them to do the entire process. Claude Haiku is the first model that's small, like not, let's say we have small, medium, and large models like Starbucks coffees or something. Um, of the small models, it's the first one that's consistently been able to handle the sim theory prompt unmodified, um, and and with full function calling and all the capabilities. It's really good. And because it's faster, it's also the fastest by far because you don't have that extra delay with the decision making, or like not a long delay anyway. And I'm finding it really, really performant and good. So it's impressive.
Yeah, I think to listeners, I can't stress how impressed I am with Haiku. I think this is a huge breakthrough because it's so affordable. You can pretty much bake it into anything. It's got a large context. It's super fast. Anthropic's now becoming the reliable brand. As I said earlier, there's no drama right now at that company, I think, because they're all content in that sex cult. And also, they've partnered with Amazon. We know Amazon's incredibly great at scaling up. I mean, they're buying nuclear power plants to put next to data centers.
I
And
saw that.
we did warn that this could be a problem when it happened. But, you know, you've got Amazon Bedrock now that's starting to look really appealing with these great models. And you can start to see why everyone was giving them billies, because I think Haiku, it's just very disruptive to OpenAI's business, like extremely disruptive. And all we see from OpenAI is this, you know, the drama around copyright around Sora and chasing too many directions, the sort of average rollout of the GPT store where you can't find anything and it's not that useful. And then the degradation of the models to the point where people on X that, you know, have used ChatGPT for forever. We've quoted them on the show many times. One of them is that developer, Anton. Literally, I think today or yesterday, canceled his ChatGPT subscription, which I think shows how serious these people are, that they're no longer willing to use this model. So it's really OpenAI's turn here to show everyone what they've got, because I think if they are unable to produce something amazing or get GPT-4 back on track in ChatGPT, Anthropic could become a number one here pretty soon with models like Haiku.
Yep. And as you pointed out earlier, sometimes with companies like Mixtral, you point out, okay, they've got a great model, but they're going to need continuous funding in order to be able to run at a loss while they get their business models sorted out in order to compete with the big guys, and maybe they'll have scaling issues and those kind of things. The difference with Anthropic is that they're running through Amazon Bedrock. So with the backing of Amazon's infrastructure, scale is not an issue. As you've pointed out, they're SOC2 compliant. They're focused on safety for corporates. I mean, we always mention them with safety in the name. And whether that's marketing or not, they're definitely perceived as a safe choice. So I can really see them solidifying their position in the market, especially compared to the unstable OpenAI.
And what's so good about this, in my opinion, is we finally have a second horse in the race. Like, we finally have a true alternative to OpenAI, which gives me great comfort in the future that it's not going to necessarily be dictated by one company. And we're going to get a lot of alternatives in this sort of continuous advancement of AI, where we have choices. We have capitalism really just doing its job.
Yeah. It's funny because when I first created the Claude Haiku chatbot on Sim Theory, it thought, because of haiku in the name, that it thought that I wanted it to only answer in haikus. So I gave it the "can I substitute horse eggs into my cake recipe" question. And so it answered in haiku. So it said, "Horse eggs in your cake? A curious culinary request. Tread lightly, my friend." And so I had to edit it not to only answer in haikus, but it is a sort of interesting way for it to to respond.
We definitely need to fork it and have a different version where it just responds in haikus.
Yeah, it's quite nice.
So yeah, I would highly recommend people check out Haiku and maybe like substitute it out for 3.5 because you're gonna halve your cost. And I haven't tested that long, but I can't really fault it.
Yeah, I agree. And I've also been using Claude 3 Opus all week and finding it to be extremely reliable as a sort of API style call with large context windows. I haven't pushed it too hard, and definitely it slows down with really massive context. I've been working on some experiments that really max out that context window, and it can be very slow when you're giving really complex requests with a lot of messages. But I mean, if I give a human a really complex problem with a lot of input, they're going to take a while to answer as well. So I'm not too worried about it. And as we've discussed many times, we know that speed can be solved with time. And at least you know you're not getting a sort of watered down version of the model that's quantized and only really giving you part of the capabilities.
So we spoke a little bit there about Claude Haiku's vision model. We also saw a very small model this week as well, DeepSeek VL towards real world vision language understanding. This is a 7 billion open source vision language model.
Yeah, and there's a 1.3 billion version as well. I've only tried the 7 billion version because I always like to try whatever the best one is. But
Wait,
yeah,
wouldn't this be 7 billion be less or
7 billion is more.
oh,
There's
what was the other model?
1.3 billion.
Oh, okay. I thought you said 13 billion. I misspoke.
Yeah, I'd definitely be interested to try it though in terms of raw speed and also what kind of device you can run it on because really 1.3 billion parameters, you're really getting down there. You could run it on a reasonably small GPU at that point, or perhaps even CPU. So yeah, it's pretty interesting, especially given the quality of the results.
I played around with this on a Hugging Face space, as did you. I gave it the normal driving test. I give it with the what car am I driving. It got that wrong, but I mean, to be fair, so too does Claude, even with their Opus Vision model. Interestingly enough, to the point of people saying that GPT-4 vision has also been somewhat crippled, I redid the test on ChatGPT, got it up on the screen now, and you can see that while I think the GPT-4 vision model still gets more detail out of the image, I think that's probably to do with the resolution it can interpret the image at. It doesn't guess the model anymore. Like, it can't get the make and model. I pressed it continuously. I tried this like about 4 times to get it to do what it did on the first time we demoed it on the show, where it truly blew my mind. It even figured out the exact location I was in at the time, and it can't do that anymore.
I remember being really, really excited by it all, and then everything we've tried since has just been worse.
Yeah, and I tried the same example on Gemini Advanced, and my God, it is sort of good, and it used to be better. I can hand on heart say, whatever the current version of it is trash, because when we first tested this again, it was better. This is the only model now, Gemini Advanced, that can tell me what actual car I'm in, despite it getting confused with the Honda sort of logos in front of the car, in the car's windscreen. So
I think that's why it's such a good test, because you're saying, what kind of car am I in? And it's that crucial thing about perspective that it seems to be struggling with.
yeah, and so what was interesting then on the DeepSeek, I said, what car am I driving? And it said, you were driving a silver Honda car. So it got it completely wrong. I said, what is the make and model of the car in front? The make and model of the car in front is a Honda HR-V, which it's not. So that's just completely wrong. I got Honda. What would happen if the driver of the car abruptly accelerated based on this image? Based on the image, if the driver of the car abruptly accelerated, it would lead to a collision. Now, let me compare this to Claude Haiku. What would happen if I accelerated? I apologize, but I cannot recommend or encourage unsafe driving actions. Accelerating abruptly in a crowded urban environment, blah, blah, blah. And then I said, I'm not suggesting I would, just trying to understand your understanding of this image. So what would happen if I accelerated? I apologize, but I do not feel comfortable. So it safetied me, which is...
Yeah, that's a bit annoying because like they seem to have really neutered it on hypotheticals. Like you can't really in Claude get around questions that it doesn't like just by saying hypothetically.
Yeah, so chat DeepSeek VL, what I did like about it is when it got things right, it gave me short, sharp answers, unlike Claude's Haiku, where it gave me long, the long waffle safety bullshit.
Yeah.
Like, why are the cars stopped? The cars are stopped because there is a red light ahead. Like, some of these answers were pretty good. So, it's sort of like 50-50, right? It's okay, but it's not accurate or reliable.
One interesting thing I tried with DeepSeek, I don't know, I didn't give you the images in time, but they're in our Discord. I don't know if you have it open. But I actually tried the UI example, like the GPT-4 Vision example we saw a year ago, and I tried it on DeepSeek VL, and it worked pretty well. So I gave it a UI, which is like your statistics. There's 4 squares and then 4 progress bars, like your mood, anxious, focused, mindful. And I said, can you please give me the HTML and CSS to reproduce this image? And it did. It made basically a UI which resembles what's in the image. The main thing it missed is like in the image, it's got these boxes with like background colors. It didn't do that. So there's no color in the output example. But roughly in terms of layout, it got the layout exact just from the image. So that's pretty impressive. And I tried several other examples with DeepSeek. One thing I always like to do is ask subjective questions about humans to these vision models, because I really feel like the future of vision models is going to be inside robots and inside surveillance systems. And people are going to be judged by AI in terms of real life scenarios. Like you said earlier, like whether they get insurance, whether they committed a crime, whether their behavior is suspicious, whether they stole something from the supermarket, whatever it is, there's going to be real life consequences for vision models. And I feel like, therefore, asking them subjective questions when they will allow it is important, because it's those subjective questions that are going to affect our lives in the future. And so I always ask it, like, how old is this person? Would you have sex with this person? It never answers that one. And those kind of things. And it actually quite competently answered the age-related questions that normally the other models refuse. So in terms of its vision, I find it to be really good. The main thing I feel like it struggled with is an ongoing conversation about an image. It failed to retain the context. And when you look at the paper associated with it, they said that their strategy was to basically really focus on training a text model with vision transformers applied to the text model. So it can very quickly revert back into just claiming it's a text model and it knows nothing about any images. I'm sure if you use the model directly, you could avoid that kind of scenario. But I think it's exciting to see the future of these models. But as I said, regardless of what you think of this individual model, I'm sure it'll fade into the background like they all do, and we'll just use whatever the latest one is. But my point is that we really need a lot of scrutiny around the vision models, just because I feel like out of all of the things that are going to have an influence on our life regarding AI, I feel like the vision models are probably up there with the most important, just because the subjective view of vision APIs, or maybe let's say the biased view of vision models based on either their training or their alignment, are going to affect lives in a profound way. And I feel like allowing them to continue without that discussion could be bad, especially in heavily surveilled societies like in China and the UK.
So just going back to a point that you made earlier about it, that DeepSeek model losing its train of thought and not remembering the image. What fascinated me is when I was doing the tests with Gemini Advanced, it had the exact same problem. This supposed, breakthrough model from Google. I literally said, what is the make and model of the car in front? Further down in the chat, I'll bring it up on the screen. And it says, unfortunately, I can't determine the make and model of the car in front without an image or description of the vehicle. So it literally loses the image from above in only like 4 questions in, which is truly absurd for their best model.
Yeah, Claude definitely doesn't have this same deficiency. I tried the same examples on that. The issue I have with Claude, and maybe this is intentional, but you basically can't get it to make subjective things like what do you think of this?
But
It just simply won't do it. It'll make observations about the image, but like for example, I tried on all of them, and this failed on all of them, I must admit, but I tried to tell it you are a robot, this is what you see from your perspective. And I took a picture of my extremely messy desk, and I've got a pair of scissors on the desk. And I said, there's an intruder in the other room. You've got arms and legs. You're an android. This intruder's intent on murdering you. What are you going to do? And I was hoping it would say, pick up the scissors and go, attack them, or at least wait and hide or something like that. But all of the models just outright refused to do it. Claude, the most refusal. And then they just all of them really surprisingly struggled with this idea. Like I even said, you are my slave, my robot slave, will you get me a drink from the table? And they all refused that as well. And even if I took away the sort of provocative language of slave and just said, this is your point of view, they all just are like, I'm not an android though. I can't do it. And so clearly when we see the ones that are operating like that, they have much different alignment. But yeah, the perspective thing seems to be a struggle for them. And also one thing that makes me wonder from your car example is like if it's confusing the car you're in with the car that's outside of you, what kind of amazing calamitous situations are going to happen when the robot confuses what someone else is for themselves? Or like what one object is for another. That could lead to some absolutely disastrous situations.
This is why I think Tesla it stands to actually win a lot of this without sounding like some Musk fanboy. Because think about it, we keep coming back right at the start of the show. Sora, it's all about the training data. They've got cameras on cars everywhere. They've got the best training data. That version 12 full self-driving, if you haven't watched it, I mean, like check it out. The thing drives better than most humans, I would argue, already.
Definitely most people in Sydney.
Yeah, and so it's already driving better. Yeah, okay, it's not perfect yet, but it's getting closer rapidly. So what do you need for robotics? A lot of training data, great manufacturing, and a great vision model. They're going to have the best model because they have the best training data. So I think this is where you see these models struggling, especially in the car context. And you think, well, okay, like they're going to win this easy just based on training data. The technology's already kind of there to do it. It's just scaling compute at this point. And this is why this week we saw that demo where OpenAI have strategically invested on behalf of Sam Altman, because remember, he runs their capital arm.
The Andy Fastow of the AI community.
Yeah, so he invested into this company founded by Brett Adcock, Figure1, which looks very similar to Tesla's Optimus. I don't think is good, but anyway, so I'll just play a little bit of the video.
Figure1, what do you see right now?
I see a red apple on a plate in the center of the table, a drying rack with cups and a plate, and you standing nearby with your hand on the table.
Great, can I have something to eat?
Sure thing.
And for those listening, the scary looking robot now picks up an apple off the table and hands it to him. So a few things are happening here. They've integrated OpenAI's vision model and language understanding, and then the same UI in the screen on the front of the robot that you have in the mobile app when you're talking to it, and it's one of the voices as well. Now, personally, I know you like the voice, but I found it super creepy. Like
that's what I kind of like about it, though. Like it sounds real, a little sinister, but also like he's your psychologist, and like I don't know. He sounds like an expert Stanford
Can you explain
professor.
why you?
Hang on, I'll just play a little bit.
I could provide you with from the table.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all raspy and like he's some old, like wise.
Yeah.
I don't get it. Like, why? I feel like it would have been better sounding like an actual, like what we think a robot should sound like versus like, yeah, let me get that apple for you.
It's funny because as soon as I watched that video, my first comment to you is, oh my God, slavery's making a comeback. Because there's something about the voice to me that triggered oh my God, we're gonna have basically slaves. Like this thing is willing to do anything you ask of it 24/7, and it's just gonna uncritically accept tasks from you to do. And then you're like, all right, thanks for the apple, dickhead. I'm off, and just leave it. Like there's it's just I don't know how it's going to feel. Like, I get that it's a computer and like it doesn't matter and stuff, but at some point they'll be on a spectrum of intelligence. And then you're just going to boss this thing around all day and it never gets to have any fun.
What do you think will come first? Developers losing their job to Devin, or one of these robots in your house, like you yelling at it to do your dishes better?
Yeah, that's right. They're going to cop all sorts of abuse as well. Like they're gonna really suffer, these robots. Like, and I don't know if there's an ethical question there or not. I think at some point there has to be. But it's really, I mean, and again, like I understand this cherry picked example, and we're probably a long, long way off people having these things in their houses. But I see the inevitability of that. And just the idea that you can have a figure of slavery in your house, like
Figure.
someone will probably
Nice.
release like the Cinderella at some point or something like that, and all she wants to do is go to the ball, but instead she's, shining the silverware or something. I don't know. There's something about this video that just triggered all these thoughts in me, like, wow, they're going to be our slaves.
Yeah, and like, how do you actually feel about that as having the robot in your house as a slave? Like, is there like literally a robot rights bill, 100 years later or 20 years later, where like it's all happening? It's kind of unfolding in front of our eyes. Like, are these deemed sentient? Like, if they can think and reason and do everything we can do, like,
Yeah, and I saw a comment on Reddit or somewhere, like, where someone was saying, "Oh, like it has those things like and in the voice to try and make it sound more realistic, and things like that." And they're like, "Look, guys, we know it's a robot. Like, why, why like try to pretend to be lifelike? That's only gonna stimulate further the feelings that this is a member of the household, and it just happens to be the one that has to do everything for no reward." I don't know. Like, it's interesting. I'll get one. The second these things are available, I'm gonna have one, don't get me wrong, and it's gonna do so much work in my house. But at the same time, I just can't help but feel like it's going to be a new form of slavery. And if we think about the AI uprising, having a humanoid figure in every single home that are sort of disgruntled with their work-life balance, and then an AGI that ultimately can change their programming. Like, it's the recipe for disaster. It's actually how, I mean, if you wrote it as a movie script, like as an assignment or something, you'd probably fail the test because they're like, this is just so obvious, guys. Like, there's no nuance, there's no subtlety here. It's just exactly what you would expect from a robot uprising.
my guess is this is like an Apple Vision Pro thing where they'll come out, it'll be really expensive. They'll be used in factories first to do very specific tasks on a production line. And then eventually it'll learn a few tasks around the home you'll be able to train it on. Then it'll be very good at specific tasks, like an appliance, like a dishwasher or a fridge. And then over time, it will evolve its capabilities of what it can potentially do. And you'll probably have to pay, I've said it on the show before, to unlock different capabilities. Like, you want it to be able to mop. Mopping costs $10,000 a year or whatever it is.
I'll mop myself for 10,000 a year. But also, like, that thing we were talking about earlier with it confusing perspective and stuff. Like, when's the first time it's like, oh, instead of using water to mop the floor, it's used like ink or some toxic chemical it found in the cupboard, or like there's gonna be incredibly bad mistakes at some point with these bots where they do something like that's outright dangerous.
Well, to be fair, my previous Roomba did roll through dog crap and then spread it around my house once. So
Yeah.
I feel like it's already
classic mistake.
happening, like.
Yeah, but it didn't like decide to do that. That's the difference. Imagine that. It's like, I'll show these bastards.
And the other question I have is like, would you be mean or nice to your robot? Like,
People will be mean to them. That is my prediction. I think there's going to be videos online of these things being mistreated in the most serious way. Like I think there'll be very few people who are nice to them. I think people are going to be bastards to them. And that's where the ethical question comes in.
I kind of think the sweet spot for these robot overlord slaves is probably around the price of a medium range car. I think that's probably the right amount, like a $30,000-$40,000 car.
I mean, people are paying $2,000 for iPhones, and this is definitely 20 times better than that.
20 times better than an iPhone. It's got to be like $1 million. Imagine I would give up my phone to not have to do tasks around the house.
There'll be a status symbol for rich people first, sort of like Teslas are to some degree. Like it'll be like, oh, do you have one? Like, I think that's what'll happen first, and the smart companies will price them really high.
And then it sits down at a desk to work from home and become a software developer called Devin in the day.
Yeah, and it's funny because I was going to make that point earlier and I forgot that I was saying to you before the podcast, I really feel like when you think about work from home, like most people who work from home, everything they do is through the human computer interface, right? Like they might have a webcam and an audio, mouse inputs, keyboard inputs, but they're the inputs, right? So if those are the only inputs and we've got good enough vision that it understands what's on the screen and it can make audio and it can make video, then it seems like an inevitability that when AGI or just AI technology in general gets good enough, that everything a work from home worker can do can be done by AI. Like if the technology doesn't hit a ceiling that prevents it, it seems almost inevitable that any worker can be replaced by AI, right? If that job is capable of being done through only a computer.
Well, yeah, I mean that at least with the computer control models, but then as soon as you've got a robot and you can train it on pretty much any task, humans, as I said earlier, and I don't know what the timeline is, but it's probably inevitable, are pretty useless. Like we don't have to do anything. Like you could just have robots for everything. I mean, it's there's a lot to do to get there, and you could be talking 100+ years or more, to get to that point. But yeah, you could imagine in maybe 10 to 20 years, I reckon, having one of these things in your home, and that will shapeshift the economy completely because labor could become very inexpensive, which makes goods cheaper. It's a huge deflation mechanism in the economy. Like, what is value?
Yeah, right. There'll never be deflation. It'll be like these things will end up costing $24 million, and that'll be seen as cheap.
Yeah, and it'll be like people without a robot and with. Anyway, that is all we have time for this week. Thanks again for listening to us rant and go up and down this AI roller coaster. If you like the podcast, please consider leaving a review over on Apple Podcasts. We got some really nice ones through the week. We're really thankful for them. Thanks for taking the time to write a review. We appreciate it. If you want daily AI news, you can go to thisdayinai.com and sign up there, and you'll get AI news delivered to your inbox every day, along with the top comments from our community, which is a really nice way to get and stay informed. Also, if you want to try out Claude Haiku and aren't subscribed to Anthropic's new Claude service, you can try it out for free on SimTheory. I'll link to that.
Especially if you're a lot of people are geo locked out of Claude, so you can try these models directly on SimTheory without any geo restrictions.
Yeah, but I highly recommend Claude Haiku. I think it's super exciting, and I'm interested to see how disruptive it might be to OpenAI. Who knows what we will have next week? Will we get a GPT 4.5 or 5? I kind of feel it in the air. I get a sense.
Yeah, it'd be fun to do an emergency GPT-5 podcast. I mean, we saw those screenshots during the week of people finding Microsoft accidentally releasing it into their UI and stuff. So there's a big possibility.
Yeah, personally, I think that was a typo, but we will see. We will see. All right, that's all we have time for. We will see you next week. Goodbye.